Good morning, everybody. My name is Arpan, and this is Dhruv, and we are from the data team at Automatic. And as data scientists, one of the things we're often asked to do is find out or explain how data relates to a customer, or explain what are the factors that distinguish customers from each other. But we sort of rarely have the luxury of getting to ask the customer themselves. And we feel that this problem is sort of amplified in the IoT space because, for the most part, you are getting a lot of your signal from a device, and you have thousands or millions of such identical devices, all almost kind of speaking the same kind of language, if you will, of the data, and that's what you have to work with. So we're going to kind of cover some of the work we've done in that environment and sort of bring an IoT perspective to sort of finding your audience or audience segmentation. So at Automatic, our mission is to connect every car out there to the cloud and use the data that we collect to essentially build products to enrich the overall car ownership experience. How we do this is we build our own OBD hardware that connects to your car and essentially plugs into your car, connects to your smartphone. And through this connection, we're able to gather high frequency, very granular data and forward it to our servers. We're able to actually collect a wide variety of data from vehicles. For example, this graph here represents a time series, which is representing the velocity of a vehicle during a trip. And with a little bit of cleanup, it's a noisy time series, but with a little bit of cleanup, we can start to say a lot of interesting things about a trip. For example, one of the things that our device actively detects is hard braking, which is represented here by these sharp drops in velocity. But we want to sort of go beyond a trip to actually discovering interesting things about the entities that are involved in generating a trip. So the user and the driver and the vehicles. So how do we sort of, I spoke about the abstraction that exists between the device and the actual end user in IoT. So given that and the fact that we're sort of looking at millions of points like this on a daily basis, how do we discover something deeper about our drivers and vehicles involved in this process? So there's various sorts of drivers out there. We've all been driving and have our personal experiences, and we end up sort of bucketing these drivers into various types depending on how easy they make life for us on the road, or more, which is more often the case, how they diverge from our personal rule of the road. And you've all seen sort of the BuzzFeed type of articles about, here are the 14 types of drivers we all should know about, and there are those driver personality quizzes. But at Automatic, having access to all this historical data and highly granular data, we felt that it was sort of our duty to have the data itself reveal to us what are these types of drivers that are out there, and can we actually segment them? And sort of what would also be the factors that differentiate these various types of drivers that we discover. And it's not just the drivers that are of various types. Vehicles on the road are also, differ vastly in their characteristics, and we also have strong opinions about those. So once again, we felt that having all this data, we wanted to really validate or disprove some of these preconceived notions about cars that are out there. And to make this more challenging, we add all these different driving styles to the equation, and you end up with a situation which we see a lot in our data where we have an identical vehicle sort of being driven in 3 different ways. So you have a Honda Civic, which is known sort of to be a fuel-sipping economy vehicle, but how do we consistently validate that across 3 very different styles of driving as displayed here? And sort of to add another dimension to this problem, an identical vehicle, basically a make, model, and year configuration, driven in sort of similar manner, can exhibit various different characteristics depending on factors like how it's being maintained, its aerodynamics, or if it was accidentally programmed to report lower emissions that are actually being emitted by the engine and the vehicle. That one never happens. So the next obvious question is, we're talking about all these entities that are behind the device. So how do we model users and vehicles and essentially these entities at Automatic? So what we have here is a velocity acceleration frequency histogram. And the x-axis represents velocity, the y-axis has acceleration, and the intensity of the color at various positions indicates the time that the user has spent accelerating and decelerating at various velocities. And if you think about it, accelerating and braking are basically make up a large part of what we do when we're driving out there and controlling a vehicle, and that's what goes into determining our driving behavior, essentially, or our driving style. So this representation sort of is a good way to capture essentially the driving profile of a user or behavior of a car, if you will. And it sort of instantly confirms a lot of things that we know about how people normally drive. So for example, the width of the colors at any point indicates the extent to which they are accelerating and decelerating. So the fact that most normal drivers do not wildly accelerate or decelerate at higher velocities is something that's instantly confirmed by the representation in this data model. Another thing that's great about representing sort of entities this way is that it offers a great visual, or the ability to visually compare two different profiles or behaviors very easily. So here we sort of compare and contrast. On the left, you can see a profile where there's a lot of sudden acceleration and deceleration at the lower velocities, and the spread is much wider out there. But then we have another driver who is sort of more smooth in how they get up to certain speeds, but then they stay sort of at those high speeds and don't really deviate from that pattern. And this data model is also very expressive because it allows us to sort of go beyond the basic sort of physical analysis of how much acceleration and at what velocities that is happening, but also sort of infer some latent factors about the entities involved in generating this histogram. So for example, this is Dhruv's velocity acceleration histogram, and he commutes from the South Bay every day. But if you look at sort of the velocity in that histogram, you can tell that he's not coming into the office at 9 a.m. in the morning in order to achieve those velocities. But basically, we've taken sort of the histogram, and with the ability to sort of correlate trips with that, we can say a lot more and sort of start getting into this area of latent factors that affect driving. So here we can say that this histogram belongs to sort of a highway driver who consistently stays at pretty high speeds and doesn't accelerate or decelerate much. Similarly, you can contrast this with another one of our staff members in the office who is more of a city driver, and they are mostly restricted to lower velocities while driving in the city, and the width of how much time they're spending accelerating and decelerating sort of indicates their impatience while they are traveling. So it's kind of apparent that city driving versus highway driving could be a major latent factor while analyzing different driving behavior and profiles. And Dhruv's going to kind of go a little deeper into what some of those other latent factors are and how we determine them.
Thanks, Arpan. So one of the objectives of this whole study was that we wanted to come up with simple, relatable attributes which we can take and understand who our customers are, and possibly take the same attributes to our customers and educate them about what sort of driving styles they have and what are the other types of driving styles that other users have. Fundamentally, this is a dimensionality reduction problem, but before I get into the specifics of how we get to those latent factors from this descriptive velocity acceleration curve, there's a more important step before that. That's data cleanup. So we found that it is useful to actually formulate this problem as an image processing problem. And in the image processing world, you have this traditional handwriting digit recognition problem, which has similar denoising requirements. So in this case, there's an algorithm called stack denoising autoencoder, where you take the image and kind of train a neural net of the image against itself. And you come up with this compressed representation, which is the blue dots in between, which essentially is a measure of how robust your model is. And we felt that our kind of formulation fell in the same bracket. So we did the same thing. And let me talk about some of the sort of errors that we have. So for example, a user who probably doesn't clock as many miles, his velocity acceleration frequency histogram doesn't saturate fast enough. So when we take just the raw histogram, the cluster formation is very non-separable. So that's kind of, if you can see the histograms on the left, they are the raw histograms, and the ones on the right are the ones that go through the robust representation. And when we actually train the deep encoders, we actually use the more saturated histograms instead of like histograms just across a week or across one trip. Okay. So for the actual clustering, we use non-negative matrix factorization, which actually works very well for histogram kind of data, which is essentially counts of frequencies, especially when it's coupled with KL divergence. And at the base, it's essentially a matrix factorization algorithm with non-negative constraints on the two matrices W and H. H is the matrix of cluster centroids, and W is the matrix of factor membership across the different latent factors. Great. So we applied NMF to our cleaned up velocity frequency histograms, and these are the sort of latent factors we discovered. As you can see, there's sort of like nice separation across these clusters. So it might be worth to just go into some of these clusters and see like what do they actually mean and what can we learn from them. So for example, this one, this is a driver who probably gets at very high speeds, but has a very calm behavior at those high speeds. Probably someone who would invest in a radar detector. This driver is pretty aggressive. If you see his vertical spread, he doesn't stop for much else, but is usually at much higher speeds. This one, there's a lot of braking and acceleration behavior at low city and neighborhood speeds. Someone like a taxi cab driver who will get you there in time, but probably not in one piece. And the last one, so I think you can get a sense of where I'm kind of going with this. Looking at these kind of latent factors, we can actually relate them to certain personas. And that's at the core of the study, where we want to take these latent factors and understand what they really mean and how we can represent these factors to our users. And we can go further actually to simplify our understanding and kind of look at different hidden variables which kind of can explain these latent factors. So we kind of came up with three variables. The behavior of drivers at city and neighborhood velocities is kind of a measure of their impatience. Their behavior at highway and expressway velocities, which is sort of a measure of their aggression. And then kind of local conditions, which is a combined factor of traffic, weather, terrain, temperature. Usually these are things which are outside of the control of a driver, but affects the velocity distribution significantly. Okay. So we took these clusters and then we looked at correlating drives and kind of made this matrix of the different factors that I just mentioned. So it might be worth just going into a couple of them and seeing what they actually mean. So we saw the one above. We kind of call this the serene sage. He's a guy who's pretty patient, doesn't drive too much in traffic, is consistently at high speeds, and you can see the kind of the attributes are accordingly written on the right side. The one below is more like a race car driver. He's pretty aggressive, sees moderate amount of traffic, and drives mostly on the highway and the expressway. And we actually successfully turned this non-negative matrix factorization clusters into a data product where our users could actually go and play around with this data and kind of see what kind of driving style they fall into. And we would love for you guys also to go there and play with this demo data. You don't necessarily need an automatic for this, and kind of see like how we've taken these latent factors and the attributes that we have used to describe these latent factors. Okay, but essentially driving behavior is very, very complex. So this is a very simplistic approach that we've taken, where we've taken like a dominant quality of a latent factor and we've kind of assigned it to a user. But users don't always kind of fall into one particular dominant quality. And there are many things that the simplistic thing doesn't account for, things like length of the trip, time of day, mood, urgency. And so this, I think the first attempt that we've tried to make is kind of make it simpler for users to digest the information about what is their dominant quality and kind of the attributes that describe the dominant quality. Okay. So this kind of brings us back to the same concept about what are we trying to do out here? We're trying to, all these devices in IoT that we're connecting, they're essentially proxies to the actual entities we're trying to learn about. And that's why this kind of is a much harder problem than many other spaces where you have more explicit engagement between the entities and the product. In the IoT space, we have a lot of these devices which are sort of sending very similar looking data, And there is, we need machine learning to actually color these things and kind of find meaningful representations from this data. And the thing that we want you to take away from this talk is sort of the data methodology that we've built and the audience segmentation algorithms that we've used. And we've kind of used this to build many different data products. For example, here we've taken the same methodology with sparse autoencoders and non-negative matrix factorization, and we've applied it to the two-dimensional curve of velocity and revolutions per minute. And you can immediately see some quantifiable patterns which pertain to gears of the vehicles, and the slope of these patterns is actually directly correlated with the torque that your car is generating at each of these different gears. And the latent factors where you do not see patterns probably pertain to hybrid vehicles and CVT vehicles. And you can clearly see that this kind of morphs very well into, let's say, a vehicle maintenance product that we make, and auto manufacturers can consume such products directly from the automatic cloud. So that kind of brings us to the end of the talk. We would love for you to go and check out Automatic, and if you would want to buy an Automatic, that's a promo code, and you can go and see more things about your driving styles and characteristics of your car. Cool.
Have you thought about gamification, like making the driver play a game so he consumes less fuel? Like you can,
Right.
Yeah, you're profiling him. This is a bad driver.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah. So this is kind of like the first step of that, right? Yes. So we had like a web dashboard where users could go and play with the data, kind of understand, what, even for us to answer questions like which are the users that can benefit from fuel savings if they change their behavior. So some of these clusters obviously have more benefit than the others. And part of this whole thing about, building this data pipeline is to, have that thing where a user takes a trip and this kind of icon pops up and says, okay, this is your profile for this drive.
Yeah, I was thinking you could even suggest what kind of music you should listen to. If you can see,
right.
This is a stressed person.
Right, so that's...
Or you could have a voice saying, should I call a psychiatrist or something like that.
You're thinking next level when you want to bring Spotify into the mix. But no, that's interesting because a part of this is already built into our product. So the question that this can help answer is which users will this benefit the most. So our device, for example, has audio feedback to help you or to help warn you when you're doing behaviors while driving that would be detrimental to your fuel savings. So if you're accelerating really hard, braking really hard, or speeding, you kind of get this audible feedback, which you can turn on or off depending on your preference. But in this case, we would know which users could probably significantly benefit from this and target them specifically. That hey, maybe this is something you should use while you're driving.
Could you actually detect if the driver is switching lanes very often? So you can say, oh, this is a dangerous driver. He's speeding and he's switching lanes. So you should warn him that you should go down.
So I think there's a distinction to be made. The point is not to judge the drivers. We kind of giving constructive criticism to the drivers. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool down. You will crash soon.
So usually lane changing behavior is a very complex topic, and we've kind of taken, we're trying to solve that problem as well. But it's very difficult to actually see, what is an actual lane change, and whether it was justified, that lane change was justified or not. So there are many subjective factors that go into it, and some of the data is actually missing for us to actually make that, like, if you had like video cameras, it would be much easier to actually make that assertion rather than just looking at drive data. So yeah.
Thanks for a great talk. We don't have enough time for any more online questions, but hopefully you guys will be around.
Sure. Yep.
Fascinating.
Yeah.